Bam, we're live. What's up, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. Happy Saturday to you. Hope you had a good week. Hope you were able to, stay level-headed. Nothing crazy going on. Saturday, got one more day until the massive slate coming up for week 3. Got some really, really exciting games coming up here. Lots of really good plays and, some shootout potential games here. And what we saw last week, recapping, just kind of developing our process here. So we had some good plays last week. Obviously, we recommended stacking the game with Dak Prescott and Matt Ryan on the other side. We had, Ezekiel Elliott, Jonathan Taylor, Aaron Jones. All three of those guys were in our picks last week, did great for us. We also recommended like Calvin Ridley. A couple other plays didn't work out for us, like Devontae Adams. We had, Jordan Reed in our lineups, in a lot of our lineups. Paris Campbell ended up disappointing, getting that terrible injury, poor one out for him. So obviously we're going to have some hits and misses every week. That's why you have to play multiple lineups, especially if you're playing tournaments. Cash games, obviously we're just looking more for some more stable, steady players each and every single week and trying to make sure that we can actually get through this and break even in the cash or get a little bit ahead in the cash, so that way we can keep loading up on those tournament lineups, hoping that we hit something big. So that being said, looking forward to this week. Like I said, what we saw last week was there was a lot of chalk plays, and those chalk plays made it into the $1 million lineup. What's interesting is typically that's not the case, but when there's an ultra chalk play, it kind of doesn't make sense to ignore it. That being said, this week I think there's a few more options here. So if you're trying to pivot off the chalk, we'll talk about those. I don't think you want to completely pivot off of that Seattle-Dallas game. That's obviously the chalkiest play of the week. Highest over-under, makes sense. You got two teams that can't defend against the pass. Seahawks are the worst team against opposing receivers, whereas Dallas is not great in their own right. We've seen multiple shootouts with both of these teams up to this point, especially on the Seahawks side, and this is looking to be a incredibly massive high-score game. Tons of plays on both sides. Going to be a lot of people playing in there, so going to be high ownership across the board. But what you can do, obviously, you're not going to play your entire lineup based off of that game. Even if you have 4 or 5 players going in that game, where it gets different is where you start pivoting to different options from different games, giving you your more diversification there. So don't be afraid of playing the chalk this week. But also we'll talk about some of our other favorite games that could potentially be shootouts. So let's start with the quarterbacks, as we always do. Really interesting player here in tournaments. I like Joe Burrow a lot. He threw over 60 times last week versus Cleveland, playing against the Philadelphia Eagles, who are pretty average on defense overall. I do expect the Eagles to finally come out with some fight in this one. I think that they can win this game against Cincinnati, who, bad offensive line, bad defense overall. This could end up being a pretty sneaky shootout. You'll notice a trend here. We have a good bit of Cincinnati and Philly players across the board. So Joe Burrow, very interesting start at only $6,200, makes for a really nice tournament play. Someone that will probably have very low ownership just based on the lack of people wanting to stack him, but Justin Herbert is a pretty interesting name going against Carolina. Now, Carolina, up to this point, has actually had some good performances against quarterbacks, so another thing that might be getting people off there. But if you're looking for a really contrarian play, I like Justin Herbert at $5,900. And then 3 weeks in a row, Mitch Trubisky continues to be the cheapest option of potential quarterbacks that could get multiple scores. Playing against that Atlanta secondary that has gotten torched 2 weeks in a row. Granted, Mitchell Trubisky is nowhere near the athletic capability of Dak Prescott or Russell Wilson that we've seen against Atlanta, but could still give you a nice 3-touchdown game. And for only $5,700, if you're looking to play higher plays elsewhere, Mitchell Trubisky ends up being a pretty nice play, a guy you can stack with Allen Robinson. All right, in cash, guys that we're willing to play naked, players that we don't really need to stack to be worthwhile. Cam Newton, of course, is probably going to be in this cash lineup every single week, as long as he's on the slate, as long as he's healthy. Playing against the Las Vegas Raiders, looked pretty good against the Saints on Monday night, but reminder that they let go a pretty good game from Teddy Bridgewater, and Cam Newton is, a good bit better than Teddy Bridgewater. Sorry, Carolina Panthers fans, you let the wrong guy go there. But Cam Newton against the Raiders, this is going to be a really fun game to watch and try to figure out if the Raiders are actually for real. And then Ryan Tannehill, just constant disrespect for this guy. Just across the board, always being underrated. He's performed pretty much every single week ever since taking over that starting role last year, and going against Minnesota, who's gotten torched in defense in week 1 and last week. Although Phillip Rivers didn't have a great fantasy day, they didn't need to because the Vikings defense or the offense was so bad. I don't expect Kirk Cousins to come out and lay an egg like he did. I think this is another potential sneaky shootout game. We've seen the Titans give up more points on defense than we were expecting, especially last week against the Jaguars. This game is in Minnesota. This could be a sneaky shootout, and I really like Ryan Tannehill to throw multiple touchdowns this week and give you a really nice baseline at $5,900. And then obviously, like we talked about at the beginning of the video, we're not avoiding the chalk. Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, you have to have a few lineups with these guys because they could go absolutely nuclear. I'm talking 50-plus Draftkings points here. And, we could see a game where there is more than 40 points scored for both of these teams. I hope this game doesn't let us down. I'm so excited to watch this one tomorrow. And hopefully, just from a football fan perspective, this is a great game. But Russell Wilson at 7,300, Dak Prescott at 7,200. Got to have a few lineups with them in. If you're trying to pivot off, the other shootout in the afternoon game slate is that game between the Arizona Cardinals and the Detroit Lions. That one has a 55-point over-under, which is pretty high. It's the second highest on the week. I definitely could see that game disappointing a bit if Arizona comes out and they're running the ball and Detroit isn't able to match it, like we saw last week with the Cardinals put up a ton of points early on, and then Washington wasn't able to come back. I could see a situation where there's lower scoring, but I think that game will deliver as well. So if you're looking to pivot off the chalk, that's another game you can jump to. Might still be a little chalky. That's why we're looking also at like the Cincinnati Eagles game and even the Bears Falcons, but you got to have some Dallas and Seattle players in almost all of your lineups because they're just such smash plays this week. Okay, looking at the running backs, this is where the money is made, right? So in tournament plays, we're looking for some cheaper options, guys that will probably be a little lesser owned, maybe not so much the second guy, but Melvin Gordon coming at $5,800 versus Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is a pretty decent defense against the run, so probably going to be pretty low ownership there, but this game is in Denver. Melvin Gordon saw like a 90% touch share or something crazy like that last week, and there's really not many other names in town. So Melvin Gordon is going to get a lot of volume. All he needs is to find his way to get into the end zone a couple of times, and he becomes a very good play for $5,800. Jerrick McKinnon, Raheem Mostert's out. Tevin Coleman is out. They're playing the New York Giants defense. What else do you need to know other than the fact that maybe Jeff Wilson ends up hogging and stealing a goal line touch or two, which would be disappointing, but we saw that Raheem Mostert was able to break off big runs. Jerrick McKinnon broke off a big run last week. Only $4,900. Massive upside here for a really cheap option. Absolutely love Jerrick McKinnon in tournaments. You could probably even sneak him into some cash game lineups too if you want, but definitely more of a tournament play. And then Antonio Gibson has seen his usage jump up pretty dramatically from week 1 to week 2. He was a top 25 option last week at running back. Only $4,700, gets to play Cleveland. Cleveland's been decent against the run, slowed down Joe Mixon, and made both Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins look a little mediocre. So not the best matchup there, but Antonio Gibson looked super dynamic last week. Going to be a super low owned guy at $4,700. Got to jam him into a couple of your lineups, especially if you're doing something contrarian. In cash, we saw Derrick Henry disappointed last week in terms of not, delivering in the passing game, not getting any touchdowns. It's going to happen for Derrick Henry. He's still running well. We just haven't seen that giant mammoth run where he just breaks off like a 50, 60-yard run and it's like throwing defenders all around him. So keep going after Derrick Henry in cash. He's not necessarily a GPP play because he would have to score like 3 or 4 touchdowns without that receiving work to actually make it worthwhile. But at $7,800 playing the terrible Minnesota Vikings defense, I would love to own Derrick Henry in cash. Jonathan Taylor as well, going to be super, super high owned this week. So that's why we're kind of fading him in tournaments. He's a chalky play across the board. Getting to play the New York Jets defense that allowed Raheem Mostert to break off a massive run on the first touch of the game. So $7,000 still seems too cheap for Jonathan Taylor, who was dominant last week, and we're expecting him to continue to grow in this offense. And then Chris Carson is an interesting name here, although he hasn't been getting a ton of carries because that offense has been throwing the ball so much. He's been super involved in the pass game, especially in the red zone, so he's almost a lock for a touchdown this week. Guy I love in cash at only $6,600. And then guys will play in all formats. Of course, Ezekiel Elliott, the number one salaried guy on the slate, with Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley gone, Ezekiel Elliott becomes the new slate leader, at least for now. Alvin Kamara may take that over eventually, but $9,200 versus Seattle. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott could have had 4 touchdowns last week. Obviously, Dak Prescott ran 3 in, but that's not something that we're expecting to see every week. It was just the nature of the game. Ezekiel Elliott barely missed a touchdown. Like, it looked, they called it a touchdown, reviewed it, and pulled it back. So, I mean, if there's any guy that's guaranteed to get at least 1 score this week, it's Elliott, but probably looking upwards of 2, maybe even 3 scores this week, and is involved in the passing game as well. If this game is as high scoring as we're expecting it to be, Ezekiel Elliott is going to be a smash play. Dalvin Cook versus Tennessee. Again, even last week with the Minnesota Vikings doing poorly, Dalvin Cook was still close to 20 fantasy points. Expect him to have a better game against Tennessee that was not able to slow down James Robinson last week. We saw Melvin Gordon look good against them in week 1. So I like Dalvin Cook a lot, only $7,600. Going to be jamming him to a lot of lineups. But my favorite 2 plays of the week, Miles Sanders at $6,400 makes absolutely no sense to me. He came out last week and had a near 80% touch share. All those people that were saying that Doug Peterson always has a committee and blah, 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 Miles Sanders sucks, that we were basically cussing at all offseason. Miles Sanders is the bell cow in Philadelphia and is pretty much the lone bright spot for that team right now. He looked absolutely incredible last week playing against the Rams. In Cincinnati, we saw got absolutely destroyed by Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt the week before. Their defensive line is in shambles. Geno Atkins is out this week. Miles Sanders is an absolute smash play. He's probably going to be pretty highly owned, but you don't want to pivot off of him just because of that, because he is going to absolutely kill it. Could be the number 1 running back on the week. Only $6,400. I don't understand why he's under 7,000, but I'm going to take it. We're going to play him every single lineup we possibly can. And then Kenyan Drake gets to play Detroit. This is the team that just let Aaron Jones put up a near 50 bomb on them in fantasy points scored. Kenyan Drake, this is the week. If you have Kenyan Drake in season-long leagues, you've been disappointed for the past 2 weeks, this is the week to own Kenyan Drake. This is the week to play him in DFS. Only $6,000, could go off for multiple scores. I mean, we saw Kenyan Drake has a 4-touchdown upside. We saw it last year. So we could see that again this week. Absolutely love Kenyan Drake in both tournaments and cash, but I think he's going to end up winning us a lot of money this week. Okay, looking at wide receivers. Some other interesting plays here. We'll deal with the easy one first. Of course, in both, I just wanted to reiterate, you have to find a way to at least have some exposure to the Dallas-Seattle game. DK Metcalf, Amari Cooper, Tyler Lockett, Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, all guys are smash plays, and I absolutely love the price point for Gallup and CeeDee Lamb. Only $5,500 for Gallup, $5,400 for CeeDee Lamb. I'm basically, when I'm constructing lineups this week, I'm looking and saying, okay, here's a lineup where maybe I pivot off of Lamb and I throw Gallup in, and then I'll do the exact same lineup where I just switch those 2 guys, because one of them is going to have a smash week. I actually feel better about Gallup this week than I do about Lamb. I know that seems crazy because Lamb has been better and Gallup has been disappointing. But if there's a week that they're going to turn things around, it's definitely going to be this week, playing against Seattle, who's given up the number 1 most amount of points to the receivers. Sorry, that's my baby crying in the background. We'll have to go check on her in just a second. But absolutely love Dallas and Seattle this week. In tournament plays, I'm going to try to give you some pivot plays that I don't think are going to be as highly owned. Russell Gage is going to see his ownership balloon if Julio Jones is ruled out. So Russell Gage playing against Chicago at $5,100 is going to be a smash play if Julio Jones is out. But even if he's not out at $5,100, I'm still going to try to jam him into lineups, especially if I'm playing Matt Ryan, trying to be contrarian there. Tyler Boyd, I like better than AJ Green this week. I know AJ Green is getting the targets, he's getting the air yards, he's getting the red zone targets, but Tyler Boyd looked pretty good last week. We know Joe Burrow loves his slot receiver, and playing against Philadelphia, Philadelphia has been exploitable against the slot receiver. They've been playing better on the outside. We saw Robert Woods kind of have a down week last week where Cooper Kupp saw over 100 yards. So look for Tyler Boyd to end up being the better receiver to own in Cincinnati. If you're playing Joe Burrow, you're going to want to stack him with guys like Tyler Boyd, Drew Sample, and then run it back with a guy like Miles Sanders or even a guy like Deshaun Jackson. So Tyler Boyd is my favorite guy for Cincy this week. And then Adam Thielen, I feel like everyone has already moved off of him because of how bad the Vikings looked last week. But if you're looking for a naked play in tournaments where you're just trying to differentiate your lineup a little bit, Adam Thielen, only $6,900 doesn't make any sense to me. Tennessee's pass defense has not been that great. We saw Gardner Minshew throw up, I think, 3 touchdowns last week. So look for Adam Thielen. He's pretty much the only guy getting any significant targets in Minnesota. He's going to score this week. He's going to be really good. $6,900 is a little expensive, but again, going to get you a different lineup in tournament plays. In cash, of course, we love DeAndre Hopkins, number one receiver on the week in terms of salary, but he's been dominant through and through. He's the number one wide receiver in fantasy right now in terms of consistency. I know Calvin really technically has more points, but I'd much rather have DeAndre Hopkins. Julian Edelman is an interesting play here, especially if you do play Cam Newton. You want to do a little stack in cash. Julian Edelman seeing the majority of the targets there. He's wide receiver 6 on the season. Probably going to continue to be really useful with Cam Newton throwing the ball well. Love Julian Edelman. And then KJ Hamler, if you're looking for a really, really cheap play. Saw 7 targets last week. Don't really know how much he's going to be used this week, but with Julian Edelman with Jerry Jeudy questionable, Cortland Sutton is out. It's pretty much the KJ Hamler and Noah Fant show in that receiving game, and only $3,000 it allows you to play some of the more expensive running backs in cash. You can also make an argument to throw KJ Hamler into a tournament. There's just not many people to stack with because we're not playing anyone on the Tampa Bay side outside of maybe Leonard Fournette. So that's why I had him more in the cash lineup. But even with any of these lineups, if you guys can find a way to jam any of these guys in, like whether it's cash or tournaments, like you can come up with that own roster construction. I'm just basically throwing out here what type of tournament I would typically play these guys in. Okay, let's jump over and talk about tight ends. This was another really tough area last week. I think it's going to be really tough this week. TJ Hawkinson plays against Arizona. We've seen 2 weeks in a row now where Arizona has not scored or has not allowed nearly as many points to tight ends as we saw previously, which is rough. But they haven't played against a really good tight end yet. They played Logan Thomas last week. George Kittle got injured in week 1 pretty early on, so we don't know yet if Arizona is truly better against the tight end this year than they were last year, or if it's just been an anomaly of only having 2 weeks of data points. So $5,300, if you're throwing in a run back, if you're playing Kyler Murray, you're playing Kenyan Drake, maybe you throw in DeAndre Hopkins there too. If you want to run it back and pivot off of a guy like Kenny Golladay, who may not be 100%, at $5,300, I think TJ Hawkinson makes a really interesting run back play for the Detroit Lions in this 55-point over-under. Look for him to potentially be involved in the red zone there. Hunter Henry is also an interesting name here. If you do take that contrarian play and play Justin Herbert, Hunter Henry got targeted a good bit last week. Carolina's pass defense, again, while they haven't given up a lot of fantasy points, we know that from a talent perspective, not necessarily there. Hunter Henry could have a pretty good week. And then Darren Arnold, if you're looking for an absolute just dart throw at a tight end that could potentially score this week and at the lowest price point possible, near the baseline anyway. Dan Arnold at $2,800. If you're looking for a contrarian play in that Arizona-Detroit game, interesting name there to throw out. Almost had a touchdown last week, just overthrown just by a little bit. Jonnu Smith in cash, love him a lot. If you are playing Ryan Tannehill, you want to have a little stack. We saw last week with A.J. Brown out, Jonnu Smith was the go-to guy near the red zone, and I think you can expect that to be, again, like somewhere like his last 10 catches, 4 or 5 of them have been for touchdowns. It's been crazy. So Jonnu Smith, really interesting play this week. Love him a lot, even at $5,200. Pretty average for a tight end, but I think he gives us a lot of upside to score, like him in cash. Zach Ertz, I know he hasn't performed up to this point. Been pretty disappointing through 2 weeks, but playing against Cincinnati, I do think that there's going to be a need for both Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, for that matter, to be heavily involved in this game. Jalen Reagor is out for a while. Deshaun Jackson just hasn't looked good, but Cincinnati's defense has really not been strong in any regard. So Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert are probably both good plays this week. We're not stacking as many people here. Maybe you could convince me to throw Zach Ertz or Dallas Goedert into a tournament lineup to run back against Joe Burrow, but probably not. And then Jordan Reed, unfortunately, saw his price go up a lot, so I'm not necessarily that into him. He's probably going to be a chalky play as well at $4,000 playing the New York Giants, but still can throw him into some cash lineups. Should probably see enough targets, being that he's pretty much the only guy there for the 49ers this week. But playing with Nick Mullins, not really sure, not as confident in that play, so that's why I have him in my cash lineups, but probably not going to be taking the shot on him in tournaments. Maybe I have that backwards, so take that for what it's worth. But if we're going to go all the way up, Darren Waller, best tight end to pay up for this week, with both Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews playing in the Monday night game. Darren Waller becomes the top tight end to pay for if you're paying up. Still only $5,700, was absolutely dominant for the Raiders last week against the Saints. Would not be surprised if they have to go his way a lot with that awesome secondary for New England. We'll see if they target Darren Waller the same way that they did against the Saints, and looked absolutely dominant. So jam him into a few of those lineups if you're looking for some upside at tight end. Logan Thomas gets to play Cleveland, who right now Cleveland is surrendering the most points to fantasy tight ends, only $3,700. Going to go back to the well. He still had 9 targets last week. I know he didn't do anything for fantasy, but if there's going to be a week that he blows up, this is going to be the week. Logan Thomas is one of my favorite plays. And also Drew Sample, we mentioned already. If you're playing Joe Burrow and you want to include him in like a Tyler Boyd stack, throw Drew Sample out there. He saw 9 targets last week playing against Philadelphia, and they've been, a sieve against tight ends. We saw, Tyler Higbee throw up 3 touchdowns against them last week. Logan Thomas had a touchdown against them in week 1. So through 2 weeks, Philadelphia has allowed 4 touchdowns to tight ends. Look for Drew Sample to get into the end zone this week. Only $3,500. Probably going to be pretty highly owned, but someone I'm definitely wanting to join on the bandwagon. And then in terms of defenses, of course, the defense that plays against the Jets is probably going to be the featured defense here every week. But DraftKings is smart enough to recognize that, so of course they bring the price all the way up. Going to be hard to jam the Colts into your lineup because of that $4,100 price point. Few cheaper options. The Buccaneers at $400 cheaper, playing against Denver. Absolutely decimated on offense, and the Buccaneers defenses look pretty stout. They're going to be a top play this week. Chargers versus Carolina. I'm pretty set on, with playing without Christian McCaffrey. We saw Teddy Bridgewater throw some interceptions last week. Look for them to have a pretty good game. Cardinals versus Detroit. This is more of a contrarian play. If you don't think that that's going to turn into a shootout, I think the Cardinals at home could actually win this one pretty decisively. And then Washington versus Cleveland. It is in Cleveland, so that's a little bit off of what we normally do with defenses, but that Cleveland offensive line has not been great at stopping the pass rush, and we know that Washington is one of the best, if not the best, pass rushes in the league. That is the key to get Baker Mayfield to start messing up. So if Washington is able to get into Baker Mayfield's space, force a few interceptions, get a bunch of sacks, could be a very productive day for the Washington defense. And only $3,000 should be your main go-to defense this week if you don't want to spend up. All right, and that is it, guys, for our favorite plays for DraftKings this week. I hope you guys had some success last week. Let's go back. Let's get it again. Good luck to you in week 3. Thank you guys for joining us. This is Michael from the Fantasy Addiction Network signing off.